We had 2 days of extensive discussion on various topics concerning health matters within the OECS. 2 of the major concerns were the chikungunya and Ebola diseases that we know a lot of persons within the OECS would like to hear what we talked about on these 2 topics. We also talk about the pharmaceutical aspect of medication within the OECS. And here this evening with me are my colleague ministers from many of the OECS countries, the Director General of the OECS, Dr. Hospitalis from CAFA, Dr. St. Catherine, and we have Martinique representing here this evening, being admitted just a couple of days ago as part of the OECS family. So we want to welcome them and welcome you, the press. And I would ask at this point in time for the Director General of the OECS, Dr. Didicus Jules, to make some intervention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to, first of all, express our deep appreciation to the government and people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines for their very kind hospitality in the hosting of this meeting. Secondly, to recognize the fact that this is really the first, while there have been previous meetings of Ministers of Health of the OECS, this is the first meeting of the Council of Ministers of the OECS. So there is now formally constituted, in accordance with the provisions of the revised Treaty of Basel, a Council of Ministers of the OECS that will be reporting to the authority. This is very significant because it means health is now elevated to a level, a portfolio in its own right within the revised Treaty of Basel. In that context, too, we want to particularly welcome, as the chairman indicated, our colleagues from Martinique. They are now formally members of OECS, the Regional Council having voted yesterday, actually, Minister, to be part of it. And I think Martinique's presence here shows the depth of the commitment of Martinique, because literally on less than 24 hours notice of invitation, they not only attended this meeting of health, but they were also present in our energy meeting that took place that is taking place in Grenada right now. With respect to the meeting, as everyone knows, the 2 major points of focus were the Ebola and the chikungunya. And Dr. St. Catherine and Dr. Hospitalis will speak to some of those concrete measures that we spoke about. I simply want to say that the focus of this meeting was not on talk and further planning, but on determining some concrete actions that need to be taken with immediate effect, again drawing on the best practices of some of the territories. And here I must recognize the proactive stance of the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines in being the first OECS territory to take serious measures for containment and prevention of a potential Ebola threat, which has been since emulated by other countries like St. Lucia. But we are now looking to make these measures universal across the single space of the OECS. So the urgency, in terms of the major conclusions of the meeting, the urgency of the communicable diseases, chikungunya and Ebola, were discussed, and a series of concrete measures taken. With regard to chikungunya, you must recognize that it is already a crisis in motion. So again, measures are being looked at, a range of measures that will include significantly some critical experiments with new technologies of disease containment that will strategically, we hope, get rid of the Aedes aegypti mosquito, because that vector is a very dangerous carrier of not just chikungunya, but also dengue, and who knows what else they may carry in the future. So there's a war that has been declared from today on chikungunya, as well as preparations for a longer battle with Ebola. I mentioned Martinique's presence here, but let me say that Martinique's accession to membership in the OECS tremendously enhances our capabilities, specifically in the area of health. And our colleagues from Martinique can speak to that. They presented today on the areas of collaboration in health that they see as being win-win propositions for both Martinique and the OECS. The other great outcome was a recognition of the significant progress that we have made. We tend in the Caribbean to focus always on the problems, and often we ignore the achievements that we have made. There has been significant strides made in the OECS in the areas of HIV treatment, prevention, and reduction by all of the member states with the assistance of our development partners. So we recognize that the successes of the OECS pharmaceutical procurement program, which has resulted in huge savings for the governments of the region in the availability of medicines and drugs, particularly on the HIV front as well. Lastly, we recognize there were new opportunities that we saw for best practices in different corners of the OECS that now need to be made universal to the single space of the OECS. And that includes the World Pediatric Program to spread this to the entire OECS, but with a specific attention to the Leeward Islands and Martinique. The Adolescent Sexual and Reproductive Health and Health Rights Program that we now need to take on as a campaign in its own right. The figures presented and the statistics presented on adolescent sexual and reproductive health threats have been truly frightening, and ministers have agreed that we need to deal with this in a very strategic way by engaging with partners, including the churches, so that people are aware of the current present dangers that our adolescents face, and that we all commit to being on the same page in terms of how we deal with that, but recognizing some of the cultural sensitivities associated with this matter. There was also, in terms of new opportunities, a recognition of the opportunities for strengthening partnerships, principally with CAFRA, which is the Regional Health Organization, and PAHO, the World Pediatric Project, and the Global Fund. So we are going to be shaping stronger modalities of cooperation with them. And finally, mechanisms for healthcare financing have been put on the table that seem very positive and doable, but this has to be brought to the OECS authority, the heads, for their sign-off and approval. In summary, what has come out of this meeting, I think, underlying all of these specific issues is a recognition of the importance of undertaking systematic healthcare reform across the OECS to harmonize our systems of surveillance, of protection, of delivery of care in ways that are cost-effective, that share resources, that recognizes centers of excellence where they now exist, and rather than trying to duplicate the wheel, for us to put our support behind those existing centers of excellence, be they in Martinique or Anguilla or St. Kitts or Grenada or wherever else, so that we share the resources, and in that way, by pooling resources, we can more effectively provide that supporting umbrella to our people, to our people's health.
In respect of chikungunya, I think really there was a feeling of recognizing and empathizing with the fact that a lot of citizens in the OECS, and in fact right across the Caribbean, are currently affected by chikungunya, and that there's a need for families who are affected to obviously look after themselves and also to try to prevent spread. In addition to the general messages about reducing the breeding of mosquitoes, it is important that people and families that have someone with the fever in the family take steps to avoid being bitten by mosquitoes. One of the threats that we looked at is the emergence of long-term pain and joint pain in people with chikungunya, and that will pose an additional burden in the time ahead. The challenge of chikungunya and the previous history of dengue reveals that we have not been successful overall, government, people, business, in dealing with the Aedes aegypti mosquito. We need more integrated approaches and communications to families about reducing the breeding and about stopping transmission. We have good agreements with, and they work with LIAT and with CAL for the transport of specimens to the labs that import to Spain. We turn around results in 24 hours. That's an important piece of the puzzle. We do need to evaluate new approaches to eradicating or eliminating the Aedes aegypti mosquito. In terms of the chikungunya, there's an overall conclusion that the likelihood of a case coming to the Caribbean is the likelihood of a case of Ebola showing up on our shores is quite low, and that's so for a number of reasons. However, while we haven't had a case, it's important that we take the further steps to strengthen individual, national, and collective preparedness so that our citizens are protected, economies are protected, and we're better able to meet international benchmarks such as the international health regulations. Those include the streamlining of harmonizing of procedures at ports of entry and the strengthening of the situation within the health sector, isolation facilities, training of health workers, the provision of personal protective equipment. I would say that partly because of the amount of coverage in North America, the problem is bigger than it really is, and there's a need to combat the epidemic of fear with reason. That the likelihood of a case is low, although we must take measures to strengthen individually and collectively. Regional approach is essential. We must be careful in applying measures not to deny people from other countries or our own citizens who have other conditions, not to deny them care. Maybe appendicitis, it may be food poisoning. But as soon as this word Ebola appears, people are, so that needs to be combated. We need to be concerned, we need to keep monitoring the international situation, but not to panic. I think one of the conclusions too, this would need to go to the authority, is the advocating with the international community for intensified support to Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Guinea to gain control of the epidemic there. Until the epidemic is controlled at source, our countries and other countries in the world remain vulnerable. I will go further and suggest, and this was a point made to the Council of Human and Social Development of CARICOM, all the ministers, that the CARICOM countries should be offering to send help to assist. The West African countries have asked desperately that they need help. We always help each other in this part of the world, and that would include with appropriate training, with appropriate provisions in place. But that would help them, and it would also help us to gain very valuable experience if it is that we have to confront the situation in our shores. We have many things in the region to build upon, and we also saw that some things that have been introduced elsewhere are not cost effective, such as the thermal scanners that are being used. They've been shown not to be cost effective in a number of situations. So I think that those have been some of the things that came out of it. We at CARPHA, at the Caribbean Public Health Agency, also agreed to work very closely with the OECS Commission and the Health Desk to strengthen the cooperation, both for chikungunya and Ebola, and also to more broadly support the growth and development strategy of the OECS.
Coming out of this meeting, there are some very clear directions which the ministers have articulated that they would like to see the countries proceed. And one of them has to do with the need for us to look at the well-being and welfare of the healthcare worker and the population at large. We need to be able to work together under a unified strategy. And over the past 2 days, and in particular today, under the leadership of some of the, what I would call pioneers in the field, including the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, has been the kind of framework within which a coordinated regional plan will take root. To put it mildly, one of the things that we have been mandated to do is to come up with such a strategy in a way that would allow for our partners, especially those partners who have been traditional and those countries which are now, who have expressed willingness to come on board, to be able to make concrete contributions. In addition to that, we have looked at what will be the public health approach, benefits, and the returns. And there are some things which are undeniable in terms of how they lend themselves to things that we must do. And that, to me, indicates the idea of protocols and procedures to protect the healthcare workers at the hospitals and at other institutions of healthcare. And these must be developed in consultation with their representatives. The other thing is the provision of what I think are some basic type of commodities at the level of the countries in terms of repellents, mosquito nets, and information as to how to conduct themselves, wearing of long sleeves, etc. These commodities and information has to be made available and has to really be available to persons wherever they are. That, to me, is going to represent a big communication strategy. And talking about communications, the other thing is for us to not only be able to say that it will be done, but that we are doing it, so that the publicity out there that is negatively impacting on our economic health will be reduced. The truth is that even though we haven't had one case of Ebola, we're already feeling the effects of it. Because people are thinking, if the United States is having problems, must this us? The truth about it is that we have taken the stance today that we will be proactive. And I don't know if I should say this, but it seems to me that when we do meet, and I hope that the DG will be able to give a little more detail on that, when we do meet with other colleagues from this part of the world, including Latin America, we will be able to come out with some, not only concrete plans, but joint memorandum of understanding of collaboration among us. We are too small to do it individually, and we are going to look for that kind of collaboration. It does not deny the fact that we will have that technical competence in every country, one, to be able to contain and deal with cases of Ebola, and we will do that. As far as I know, the plan is for us to do it within a matter of not years but months. And the other thing is for us to be able to introduce new methodologies and technologies for dealing with chikungunya. So with that said, I think that we will be in a better position. The next time we have, this is the first Council of Ministers of Health. By the second Council, we should be in a position to make some very clear statements as to progress.
Thank you. I would just like to take the time to express our gratitude and how thankful we are for the opportunity that has been given to us to participate into that first Council of the Health Ministers of the OECS, only 2 days after the Plenary Assembly of the Regional Council of Martinique voted its accession as an associate member of the OECS. This meeting has provided us with much valuable information regarding the priority issues in the health sector for the region. And more than ever, we are convinced that there is great room and lots of opportunities to strengthen an already existing cooperation. We are convinced that there is lots to be done. We have a lot to learn from the region, and we have a lot to share with the region as well. And we really hope that the synergies, the economies of scale that we will look for will be fruitful for the benefit of the people of Martinique and the people of the region. Thank you.
On behalf of my colleague ministers from the OECS, I just want to make this statement, and that is to thank our new Director General of the OECS Commission, Dr. Dijkers Jules, for his presence at this meeting today, to take time off to actually sit in through the entire meeting. I know this is the first Council of Ministers for Health, but as OECS we've had health ministers before. But the time that you took to be here, the time to look at the revised Treaty of Bastille and made provision for the Council of Health Ministers. I really want to thank you and see that there is commitment and has brought, I think, elevated the status of health, because health is such a significant part of development of people. And when we set aside time, I think talent and our treasure and resources to developing the health of our population, we have a long way to go, and I really want to thank you. You're coming in at a very critical time. Though we have had much health gains in the OECS region, it is a critical time for us. Economic crisis, we see funding being depleted in many cases, and those very serious threats that we are faced with right now. So I really want to thank you, and I say as we leave this meeting, I speak on behalf of our colleague ministers, when I say we leave encouraged that though it's looking tight for us in the health sector, we know that we have good leadership in the OECS for elevating the status of health and fighting through. Also, you can see the inclusion of Martinique already and what Martinique has brought to the table for us. So we leave here encouraged, and we're hoping that with our partners who are sitting around the room here today, there is much that we can accomplish as an OECS region, and that is on behalf of and for the people whom we serve always, the people of the OECS region and beyond, CARICOM and the world. Thank you.
David, Chair from Hungerton. I was just curious. I know it was said that certain measures will be taken in the OECS to certain preventative measures as we face the threat of Ebola, and we're currently dealing with chikungunya. I was thinking about the yachting sector. I know St. Vincent and the Grenadines, in particular, we have a problem because we are a multi-island state. I was wondering if there's any specific move that would be made to regulate the yachting sector, because I do get the impression that we have many persons entering St. Vincent and the Grenadines unregistered to some extent as a result of the yachting industry. I was wondering if OECS countries specifically will have any make any move to regulate the yachting sector as such.
There are going to be moves for regulation, not just of the yachting sector. You have identified yachting as a specific point of vulnerability, but we are looking at all points of vulnerability and the appropriate measures that need to be put in place in order to protect and prevent. Let me also emphasize that in the view of ministers, the measures to be taken will involve a significant degree of consultation with the respective sectors. So we have to be careful in taking the protective measures not to damage the potential of that sector. Now, as you mentioned the yachting sector, let me also say that the OECS just recently participated in one of the largest yachting events in North America, the Annapolis Boat Show. And for the first time, we were represented as a single economic space. So there were 6 countries present. All of the yachting agencies and sectors were represented there. But the significant thing is that we created a website that presented the OECS as many islands, one sea, right, with details for the yachting public of all of the protocols for entry, for immigration, and so on. And that website is now being translated into an effective service site. So there's something called a clear sail policy, which would facilitate the presence of yachts people in the region by a single point of entry for processing of immigration and customs and so on. So that measure, although it was taken in a different sphere in terms of tourism and consolidating tourism, will help us when it comes to the health regulation dimension of things.
That's why.
Chances of Ebola entering the region is low for a number of reasons. Would you care to elaborate on what those reasons might be? Thank you.
Likelihood of a case of Ebola arriving in the Caribbean is judged to be low for several reasons. The countries that are affected primarily Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Guinea, and we have very little traffic with those countries. Exit screening has been present in those countries for the last few months. Over 36,000 people have been screened using what's called a thermal scanner. 77 people were found to have fever. None of them were found to have Ebola. The fever was due to other causes such as malaria. So in the nearly 40,000 people leaving in the last few months from those countries, none were found to have any Ebola. And the vast majority of those are not coming here. Very, very few come to the Caribbean. Secondly, the CARICOM Impacts, which operates the Advanced Passenger Information System on behalf of the CARICOM countries, which includes the OECS, gives advance warning of anyone who has embarked in one of those countries, Sierra Leone, Liberia, or Guinea. So that's an additional level of reduction, of minimizing the likelihood of someone coming here. Now, having said that, that the likelihood is low, we still have to take steps to strengthen our preparedness individually and collectively so that we are protecting our citizens and protecting the economies of the region, given how tourism dependent we are.
It may appear strange to some people. We have a tendency to subscribe to the culture of fear and hysteria in the media, particularly in the international media. There's always a sensationalizing of these things. And you'll see from Dr. Hospidale's presentation that he spoke to the figures and the facts of the situation. But let me also emphasize that notwithstanding the low, what is deemed empirically to be the low possibility of a presence of Ebola in the Caribbean, we are not taking any chances. And the ministers were very clear about that and resolved that all of the necessary measures will be put in place to prevent it, starting with the proscription of travel from persons from these areas. Dr. Hospidale has pointed to the advanced passenger information thing. Many people in the Caribbean are not aware that we have that technology, that even at the point of boarding in those countries, we can be aware of the possibility of these people coming to the Caribbean or in any proximity to the region. And then the possibility of moving through third countries. But no, every measure is being taken to ensure that the protective steps are taken in the Caribbean, in the OECS.
Was there a consensus made that the other OECS territories are going to adopt what St. Vincent and the Grenadines and St. Lucia did by restricting travel?
Yes, in fact, we started off at some point in this meeting, I think we started off by recognizing the proactive measures taken by St. Vincent and the Grenadines. They were the first of the OECS countries to take what for some people may appear to be a drastic step, but a very necessary step in at least putting some clamps on the borders. Now, because we are now a single space, and remember we've moved to the stage of freedom of movement of people within the OECS, the tragic reality is that even before the freedom of movement, there's freedom of movement of disease. So we now have to be in step, all of us on the same page, and all of the measures put in place by St. Vincent and the Grenadines are going to be adopted by all of the OECS countries, and further measures are going to be put in place. Already, even in advance of this meeting, we had already reached out to certain significant partners. We have CAPRA here as a major partner in this. PAHO is engaged as well. There are a number of other partners, but in terms of friendly relations, you may have known that Cuba sent 350 doctors and health workers to the heart of the crisis in Africa to assist. Now, the Cubans would not send those people unprepared. So we have already made contact with the government of Cuba to get assistance, seeking to get expertise placed at the OECS Secretariat to assist in the coordination and the refinement of the plans that we have started making. Part of that will be between places like Martinique and Cuba, being able to identify the resources, the institutions that once a case presents itself anywhere in the OECS, we know how to deal with it and we know how to put the protocols of treatment in place. So Cuba is going to be on board with us, working closely with their health facilities and their capabilities to address this issue.
Okay, go ahead.
Just one more on something less scary to some extent, chikungunya. Are the ministers satisfied that their ministries and the departments who are in charge of controlling, so to speak, the spread of chikungunya, they're doing enough, or the general public are adhering to the calls made by the departments, the ministries, in terms of trying to regulate chikungunya?
Okay, in the regard, I think we all agree that we've done quite a lot, but that there is room for more, especially when we consider the lingering of the arthralgias or the joint pains and so the lasting effect of the disease. We all agonize over it, and we have decided that there is more to be done. As a matter of fact, discussions on that topic lasted quite a while as to what more could be done, and therefore we have mandated the OECS, it used to be Secretariat, we have a new term now, Commission, to give us some more guidance, and so that we will collectively look at what more we can do to stem the tide and to bring some measure of relief physically and psychologically up to our people. So there is more that can be done, but we are cognizant of the fact that a significant amount has been done, especially in light of the fact that we are virgin territory for chikungunya. But we have learned fast, and we are much better prepared, and some of the lessons learned would serve us in good stead to deal with Ebola as well.
Well, I think ministers, let me say, Searchlight Rep, that the ministers were very frank and highly self-critical in the assessment of the situation, as Minister Modest indicated. And one area that was seen to be deficient was the public relations area in terms of public sensitization and explanation. And we've resolved that in future that's going to be a major area of concern. Now, that being said, I think we also need to recognize that we have a tendency in the Caribbean to always blame governments for everything that is going wrong. And it is amazing to see sometimes people in communities where right in their backyard there are significant areas of mosquito breeding and so on, and garbage strewn around and so on, are calling on ministries of health to come clean their backyards. We have to take responsibility for our personal spaces, and if everybody plays their part, at a personal level, at a community level, then government's work at a national level is going to be much easier. So there is a lot to be done, and in fact it is instructive. Our colleagues from Martinique spoke to what they had done. They actually was a day declared, a day for destruction of the Aedes aegypti mosquito, and everyone in Martinique, from school children to individuals at their homes, to persons in their communities, to all the vector control agencies in Martinique, were involved in cleanups and removal of breeding grounds and eradication of the mosquito. And they reported that within, 2 weeks, I think, they began to see a downturn in the population of mosquitoes, and then the incidence of chikungunya started declining from there. If I recall correctly, was it 70,000 people you said? Yeah, they reported that at the peak, there was 70,000 people affected by chikungunya in Martinique. But that simple measure shows, that there's a lot that can be done without exorbitant resources if people resolve to fight this as a war. And that's why from today the ministers have declared war on chikungunya, and we are preparing for the major war of Ebola if it comes to our doorstep. Just two closing remarks. One is to recognize also the presence of the Honorable Delmond Ryan, who is the Deputy Premier and the new Minister of Health in Montserrat. You know that the recent elections resulted in a change of government, and we wanted to recognize and welcome her for her presence here. Secondly, to make a special appeal to the media, not just Minister Burgeon has and our chairman has already expressed profuse thanks to you, but we need to make a special appeal to the media with respect to the role that you have to play in this coming battle. We are very clear. I indicated ministers in their self-critical review of the work of ministries of health recognize the public relations gap that exists. And we recognize that the media has a very important role to play in public education and sensitization. Note, not in sensationalization, but in public sensitization. It's very critical that we give people the facts of the situation. This is not to say that the media should not be critical where it needs to be critical. In fact, it's a role of the media to keep governments on its toes. But at the same time, we need to bring the facts across to people, and you need to recognize your role as an agency of public education so that people can understand what they need to do and be armed with the facts. Again, Dr. Hospitale's intervention with respect to the reality and the potential of the threat shows why it is so important for us to face the facts and not give in to hysteria. Neither must the regional media allow itself to be driven by external media in their sense of hysteria and sensationalism on this, right? Because the last thing we need is for anybody to panic. We do not want our healthcare workers to be freaked out thinking that the threat is on us and that we have no capacity to deal with it. Recall that on CNN 2 weeks ago, they showed an African nurse who treated 5 members of her family, and she didn't have all the protective gear that the Americans have. She had just garbage bags, but by using the right sensible measures, she was able to save 4 family members' lives, including protect herself. That should be an example to us to tell us that Ebola is defeatable, and it is not defeatable by wealth, it is defeatable by will, by proper scientific measures, and by the will to succeed. So we need you to be part of that, to join us in this battle, and together we can succeed. Thank you very much.